Packie Bonner, you are a Celtic icon. Of course you are, 641 appearances for the club. But let me take you right back. What was it like for young Patrick Joseph Bonner, the twin, growing up in a big family in Donegal? What was family life like back then?
Well, we lived out on the northwest coast of Ireland, and it was pretty rural. I had a big family. There was 10 of us in the house, including our grandmother, seven of a family, mum and dad, 5 sisters, my twin brother, and we came from a kind of you could call a very working class background. We had a run home from school and go out and do all our jobs around, you would call it a croft. It wasn't a big farm by any means, but we were self probably contained in the way that we looked after we lived on the sea. Also, we were out and we had boats and we lived off the sea, and it was a wonderful upbringing. I look back and it sort of grabs me back there all the time. When I go back in the summer, first place I want to do is go down to the shore, go for a walk, and that's what it was. And I think my mum and dad sort of kind of put good ethics into us, good morals. We kind of had to work hard. We had a bit of respect, I suppose, for people. And my mum and dad ran a guest house also there in our teens. So a lot of people came into the house from different backgrounds, from Northern Ireland, from Scotland, from all over, in fact. We kind of learned a lot from that. My dad was a big storyteller. He loved people coming to the house, and people used to come, even when we stopped bed and breakfast and all of that. People used to come back to listen to him, and we kind of grew up in that environment. It was a very, very kind of close-knit community out in the country. Next door neighbours were very important to us also, and we used to go in and out of people's houses. There was no locks on the doors, that kind of life. Football was our probably our life also, because that's all we had to do. That's all the sport we had. We didn't have golf, we didn't have all the things that people have nowadays. So we just played football, both Gaelic and soccer.
And when did you discover or decide you wanted to be a goalkeeper? Were you like other goalkeepers in the sense that you started playing outfield and then something happened and you ended up in goals and decided that you were good at it?
Well, as I said, we played both sports, and I think soccer was a more dominant sport because our local club, Cage Rovers, was there, and our next door neighbour played with them, and that. We used to go over as kids and watch them play, and then we would start going over to play in the training and so on as young kids. Our first jersey, I wasn't a Celtic jersey, by the way. It was an Arsenal jersey. We got them out of the Shoot magazine at school. All the kids sent away for them, and suddenly they arrived, and we were only about 10 years old, we had a wee team going, and it was a soccer team, and we used to play. Different primary schools would play against each other. There was no organised football, there was no boys clubs or such, but we went and we played, and I didn't play in goals until I was 12. I got a sore side, and I decided that for that wee period I would go into goals, and then I really enjoyed it. We played on grass, which was different probably than over here. When I used to come over here then and they would play on the ash, and oh my God, especially during the summer, I was saying, my God, how can you be a goalkeeper in this country? In our country, we played on grass, and I used to go out and can almost emulate my heroes, who was Pat Jennings and Peter Shilton and Ray Clemens and those guys. And because we were very influenced by English football. We lived close to the border, so we had BBC, we had UTV at that time. If you went down south of Ireland, down the west coast of Ireland especially, they only had one station, that was RTA, and they didn't get English football. The Scottish thing, we were very influenced with it, because even though we didn't see Scottish football, our next door neighbour used to go over to Scotland to work. He used to come back. He had the Celtic Lisbon Lions, huge big photograph up on the wall, and myself and Dennis used to go over and we'd sit with him and talk, and we could name the whole team and the subs, everybody in that situation. So the Scottish game and the Scottish people and the Scottish culture influenced us greatly. So we grew up supporting Celtic and supporting English teams, and when I started playing goals, I kind of emulated or tried to emulate the heroes I watched on TV. And then I enjoyed it. I really, really enjoyed being in goals. And having a twin brother also helps, because we used to do that sort of one in, one out. And I probably was in goals more than he was, to be perfectly honest. We used to play down, and we had a piece of green grass down in front of the house. And every evening, that's where we were out playing.
You mentioned that there was no structured youth football, boys clubs or anything like that. So back in those days, was was it not expected that you could become a professional footballer? Was it on the horizon? Was it an ambition of yours, or was it just not there as a possibility?
I think as we grew up, we used to go up to see Finn Harps all the time during our teens. Again, we relied on somebody, a next door neighbour who used to go to Finn Harps all the time, and myself and Dennis used to go up, and we got a sort of the bug through that, to be perfectly honest, because you went up and you were kind of almost right behind. I used to stand behind the goals at Finn Park, when the Bohemians would come, the Shamrock Rovers would come, Paddy Roach went over to Manchester United, came down, played for Shelburne, and you were almost beside them. So you were learning from that also. And then you go back home and you would get out on the pitch, and that's who you wanted to be in, and for that moment. And then suddenly we got into an under-16 team, KG Rovers, Manus McCole, who was our manager, man in a wheelchair, by the way, which is incredible, created the opportunity for us. He set up an under-16 team, and we had a whole group of guys who'd been playing football all them days, and suddenly this was our first competition. And there were some really good players in it, even though they had never played competition before that. They were really good players, and suddenly we went and won our Donegal League, and we went in to represent Ulster, and then I got picked for the Donegal youth team from that. And from that, I think, then the ambition really felt that I can do okay in it. And then, Finn Harps came calling, and I played in a pre-season friendly for Finn Harps at 16, and against Stoke City. And that Stoke City team had Peter Shilton in goals. They had Terry Connery up front. They had Pejic. They had David Smith. They had Garrett Crooks up front, and I'm as a 16-year-old now playing for Finn Harps against this, and being in the Donegal youth team, and then getting picked for the Irish youth team from that. Wow! Suddenly I felt, wow, I can do something here.
So tell us about the time then, because there you are, you're beginning to get recognised and get noticed, but you're still a young boy. You're 16 years old, but you're playing for Finn Harps, Donegal youth team, Irish youth team, and then the man who, you mentioned the Lisbon Lions, the man is over your shoulder outside the stadium. He comes over to Donegal.
It's incredible.
Himself to sign. You ended up being Jock Stein's last signing for Celtic.
Absolutely. Sean Fallon, I've got to say, he was the chief scout at the time. Sean and Jock go back, as we know, to the great Lisbon Lions team in that European Cup, and he was a god in Ireland, Sean Fallon, in many ways too. And Sean came first. I was in the Irish youth team. I think we were playing Finland and Dublin, and we were training, and he came along and he said hello to me, and he said, how would you like to go over to Celtic on trial? And I had been over and back to Leicester City, and it just didn't work out. They didn't sign me. And I said, of course. And he said, well, I'll be in touch. Like typical Sean, do the right thing always. And he got in touch with KG Rovers. And I went over on trial. I went over on trial in November 1977. Played for Coltness United, believe it or not, a junior team in a trial. So when you talk about my first game in Scotland, it was for Coltness, not for Celtic, in junior football. And Frank Connor was sent out to watch us play. And then I came back and I played in a tournament out in Roubaix, out in France, with under-18s. Great players there, Peter Mackey, all of those. John McCluskey was there, George's brother. What a fantastic player he was. Got player of the tournament. I thought I didn't play very well. I let a silly goal in. And I was still at school. I was doing my leaving cert, and I went back home thinking that was it. And then in May I got this phone call from the local manager, Manus McCole, to say that Jock Stein wanted to come over and sign me. So
not just sign you, but come over.
Come over. Incredible. And the incredible thing about it was that we went out to the Ballyrain Hotel, which is now the Mount Errigal, out, and it's changed its name, out in Letterkenny. My mum and dad, and we went out in the car, and then representatives of the club came, and we sat in there, and they sat in kind of one room, and we sat outside and just waiting and thinking, this may not happen. This might be something that somebody has made up. And then suddenly the door opened, and in comes Jock, and he had that limp and that presence. And he was with Fran Fields, who was the chairman of Finn Harps, which is another story, but they were obviously good friends. And he came in and he started talking. I can't remember the exact words he said to me, to be honest, it's a blur. But I know at the end of it, that when he put the contract in front of me and said, sign the contract, and I got £70 a week, which stayed for a while, by the way. It didn't go up too much. £70 a week, and then he said to me, he says, I'm going to give you £1,000 sign-on fee, but make sure you look after your mum and dad, he says. I was right. Granddad had given me mum and dad probably 600 quid, and I took a few hundred quid myself and bought a suit.
And that was a lot of money back in those days.
It was, of course. And but I was and I found out years later. Of course, then Jock had left, and Sean had left when I joined in July that year, and I found out later that he had left 2 weeks after he'd come over to sign me. Maybe that was the reason. I don't know.
If this is the future, I'm off.
I'm off. But you can imagine somebody who knew, of course he knew he was going at that point in time. It wasn't a shock, so he had done. To take time out, to come to Donegal, to keep a promise that was given to me, to sign me, which is crap. I wouldn't be sitting here today. I wouldn't have done all the things. I wouldn't have played over 600 games for Celtic if that man hadn't to do it, because, and it happened unfortunately for Declan Bonner, who was a friend of ours, and he's now the manager of the Donegal GA team. And Declan was on trial, stayed in my house, and he was told at that time that he wanted to sign him. He was a really good soccer player. He was playing for the Harps also and different. And then Billy had left, and all of that left, and it didn't happen for Declan. The same could have happened for me.
Yeah.
Quite incredible.
Yeah.
But I owe him so much, and I met him a couple of times after that when he would come into Celtic Park and that, and he always said, you're getting better.
So by the time you come over, of course, Jock's gone, as you said, Sean Fallon's gone, Billy McNeil is the manager. You mentioned Frank Connor, of course. Peter Latchford was the number one at the time. And
Roy Baines was number two.
And Roy Baines was number two. So you had to go through the period that a lot of players back then had to go through, make the grade in the reserve side. How much of an influence was Frank Connor back then, being a goalkeeper himself?
He was wonderful. I can't say enough about this man, because he was hard. He set this man. I remember coming in trial, and I had long hair. I had a middle shade, by the way, at school. The first day he said, "Hey, get your hair cut," he said to me. And I remember going with my uncle and trying to find a barber and getting in there, and eventually I had to get my hair cut, and that was me heading off on trial to a place called Ruby in France with the under-18s. So he put demands on you. He always put demands on you. Even putting your shirt in right and getting yourself, that. And I've no problem with that whatsoever, because I felt that was him telling you that this is Celtic Football Club. You have to respect it. You are going to play for them, and you have to do the right thing always with Celtic, and we always did. So that upbringing for us, and you talk to any of the young guys in my era, it was always the same. Then came along Charlie Nicholas and a few of those with the earring in, and there was a battle always with Frank.
It sounds almost like national service, almost a very regimental. You're taught respect.
Yeah, you're taught respect, and that respect thing, I talked about my mum and dad making sure that we had respect, but we had to have other things too. We had to have a resilience to get to the team. You have to get up in the morning. You have to have discipline. You've got to come into training. You can't take a day off. You can't say. I don't think in all my time that I took a day off sick. Even though maybe I had a cold, you always came in. So you had to go out and train hard. You had to train with the at that time it was the reserves and the first team. It wasn't no youth teams, no academy. So you trained almost with the first team from day one. And when I came over here as an 18-year-old boy, just had turned 18, I was in with the Danny McGrains and all of those, and Tommy Burns, and when I came on trial, there was the Paul Wilsons was here, the Pat Stantons was here, and you were out actually training with them. I remember the first training session I had no gloves that time. We didn't have the gloves that they have now. And I remember coming back and there was almost lumps of skin out of my hand because of the power of the shots and the ball. I remember going up doing a training session, and Roddy McDonald and Big Shuggy was doing headers, and they were pounding him in from almost outside the box. They were like shots coming in. And I had to get used to all that. So that discipline that Frank sort of instilled in us, but he also put his arm around us. He also backed you up 100%. I remember him having rows with Big Billy about me, and I had this injury with my back, and I wasn't able to, and Big Billy was, and Frank stood up for you. Frank always stood up for you, and he pushed you, and he pushed you, and he pushed you. And being a goalkeeper, of course, in the past, he would take you outside, and he did extra work. I also have to say about John Clark, when I got into the first team, John took a special attention to the goalkeepers also, and took us out afterwards and did a lot of work with us. Even though he wasn't a goalkeeper, we needed somebody like that there to do work. So, and it was a very tight-knit, staff. There wasn't 15 or 16 or 17 staff. It was 3 or 4 people.
I always think it must be very difficult, even more difficult for goalkeepers to be able to break into the first team. There literally is one position you can play in, and managers don't tend to like to chop and change. You made your debut against Motherwell, but at what point did you feel like the Celtic number one?
Looking back on that, Roy Baines was here and he left to go to Morton, so suddenly I was number two, and I was working and training with the first team with Peter Latchford, and Peter was doing, he was a very experienced goalkeeper, and he was also a big help to me. And when you're number two and there's only two goalkeepers, you got to have a relationship. And the two of us worked very hard together, and when you're not in a team, you have to work with him, and when you're in a team, he has to work. So he did that, and I did that for him, hopefully, and we still have a good relationship to this day, which is wonderful. And the same goes in most teams. You'll find that the goalkeepers have a special relationship. But getting into teams, not easy. I was lucky, very lucky. I was in for a couple of games where I made my debut against Motherwell because Peter was going through maybe like all goalkeepers do, a rough period. And Billy came to me on the Friday and said that I'm going to play on the Saturday. I think it was St. Patrick's Day. I don't know whether it fell on a Saturday or it fell midweek, but it doesn't matter. It was a day before. There was a strike on in Ireland, a postal strike and telecommunication strike. I couldn't tell my parents. Nobody knew that I was playing over there until they got the papers.
Just go on social media.
And no social media, nothing, no pigeons. So all of that, and suddenly I was in. I had no real time to think about it. I made my debut out here, and I remember the snow being round the pitch, and they declared the pitch. Bobby Lennox played. He came back from America and played, scored 2 goals. We beat Motherwell 2-1. And then I played again. Peter came back in for a game, and then I played again in a rearranged game against Motherwell again at Fir Park. Didn't go very well. Definitely didn't go very well because Fir Park was so strange because it had a slope this way and that way, And I remember it was a one-day horrible night, and I lost a cross and I dropped it and I was put in the back of the net. So I was out of the team then for probably about another 10 months or so, working away in the reserves under Frank and working. And the reserves that time played on a Saturday at the same time as the first team, which was wonderful. And the great teams, by the way, Dundee United, Aberdeen. You can go through them. Rangers, really experienced team Rangers had too. So you were playing against really good teams and good players, and then the players who weren't playing in the first team with Celtic came down and played with us. Danny McGrain was coming back from injury. Andy Lynch, remember, played at the time, also came into the team. Big Shuggy played. All of them played. And you learned so much from them. And then suddenly come Danny McGrain's testimonial. Pre-season
against Manchester United.
Peter breaks a bone in his hand in training. I wasn't even there. I don't know what I was. We must have been back down the road. But Peter, and the news came that Peter had an injury.
You mentioned the close relationship. So on the one hand, are you thinking, "Oh, I'm gutted for him"? On the other hand, you must be thinking, "Yes,
of course." To a point, but you go into it with apprehension too, and thinking, "Am I ready for this?" Playing against Manchester United, I always remember in the dressing room beforehand. Yes, it was a testimonial, but it was Celtic versus Man United, and we know that both teams don't play friendlies as such. You want to win the game.
I remember the game. I was here.
Absolutely, and that's what we were brought up with Celtic also. Even if we went down to play Vale of Leven or somewhere down with Frank, would you take away? We don't play friendlies. We have to win these games, and that was drilled into you. So we were going out in this game as if it was the European Cup final for me, and Danny McGrain said to me in the dressing room, he says, "Be careful with Joe Jordan." Joe was playing up front, and I says, he'll be careful. That's all he said to me, and I kind of laughed it off. And I remember the game starting, and the first cross came into the box, and I came out. This is easy. Next thing, this guy, it was like a lorry coming into you, and he smashed me, and I went down to the ground, and every bone kind of shook in my body. And I was lying there, and he was standing over with those teeth missing over the top of me like that there. And that was it. And he never touched me after that because, of course, it was a testimonial for him. But he let me know I was in the game, and it was a great lesson for me, brilliant lesson. And then it was, of course, to meet Joe years later, and he came up here as assistant. He was a wonderful guy, and a guy I've got so much admiration for.
Let's get forward then and pick out a couple of achievements, a couple of notable moments. I will never forget, as a young Celtic fan, that famous day at Love Street. When Celtic needed to win by at least 4 goals, and we needed Hearts to lose to Dundee. It was never going to happen unless you believe in the fairy tale of Celtic. What was it like to play in that game. Was there a feeling, and had Davy Hay, who was a manager at the time, set the team up with the belief that you could still win the title that day?
Well, we had it won by a number of goals. I think it was about 3 or 4 goals. I'm not 100% sure what the exact figure was, but we knew that we had to. But that's the way we played anyway. You know, Celtic played what an abandonment. They didn't play a defensive unit as such. They went the fullbacks push forward, and and you threw the ball out to them, and away they go. And Danny was playing right back.
Well, the third goal typifies that.
It was a wonderful goal, and they show it now. And when I look at it, by the way, I think I threw the ball out to Danny to start that. And it doesn't quite catch me in that frame. But anyway,
the clip always starts with Danny, doesn't it?
Yeah. So Danny got it in the midfield, and up, and eventually Mo scores. So but it was a wonderful, wonderful goal. But it typified that day. There was a couple of things that happened, and I remember Alan McNally, who wasn't fit to play. He wasn't well, and he wasn't in. So I don't know whether Alan was thinking that things weren't going to work out, but he wasn't. He wasn't well, so he was missing. Wow. Then the game starts, and we kind of knew we were on a good run, and we kind of just said, listen, we'll just do what we have to do, because the demand from the Celtic supporters is always, you go out and play. You go out, and it doesn't matter what happens anywhere else, you go and you have to win the game anyway. So that was our tactics and our mindset, mentality before the game started. So on we go, and the game starts, and then suddenly, and I'll never forget the moment that Dundee scored. Because Jim Stewart was, and I know Jim now, he travels with the stuff I do at UEFA, and he's good fun. And we talk about this actually, and he was behind the goal picking up a ball, and this noise went up around about him, and he kind of looked round, see what's happening here, did I do something wrong? And then it got louder and louder, and then the whole place was up. And then when the second goal went in, but we had been playing so well, and we had the goals in the bag at that point in time.
Of course, the reason being that people had their radios with them, and they knew that Dundee had scored.
Absolutely, but we had the goals in the bag at that point. We were playing, and we were scoring 1, 2, 3, and then I think probably maybe we were 4-0 up by the time the second goal went in. And we knew then, and it was wonderful. But I'll never forget, I remember Anne's dad, my dad, on the pitch afterwards, because none of us expected, maybe in one way, that we were going to, so we had no plans made that we were going to go and celebrate. So he was saying, I'll take the wee fella and I'll take him back. And I says, okay, on you go, So the arrangements were made at that point, and we were in the dressing room, and there was Alan McNally in the dressing room. He had jumped out of his bed, obviously, well and fit, but the excitement overtook him, and he got himself down to the thing, and he was in there to celebrate with us, So it was great for Davy Hay too, because you're under pressure as a manager, to manage this club is an incredible club to manage. And no matter if it was 100 years ago or it's now, the same pressures are there. You have to win every game. You have to win a championship, you win a league, a cup. You've got to win something. You can't be. And a lot of managers have left because of that. And Davy Hay needed that championship, and it was a great moment for him and his family.
And it's a great moment in Celtic's history. Fast forward a couple of years, then the Centenary year, when you first came in today ahead of this interview, I said to you, so 4 league titles, 4 Scottish Cups and 1 League Cup, and you said 4 Scottish Cups? No, I think just 3, because you don't count the Centenary as one of you. You didn't play the game, you played the whole season, so you have the league medal, of course. You don't have the cup medal. Having played all the rounds up until that point, you still don't see that as being you?
Listen, I was so gutted on the day. I remember it so clearly to this day. I played all the season. Alan McKnight came in earlier in the season in the league a couple of times because I was injured. I had this back injury that was giving me really, really serious problems. I remember going up on a Tuesday to train. I remember going up distinctly with Brian Scott and training, and I got this almost pain down the side of my leg initially. And I was getting treatment for, and every day I had to do stretching because I was told that it wasn't a disc, it was a ankylosing spondylitis that I had, which isn't very good diagnosis, and you've got to keep stretching and keeping yourself. And I was really fit, and I could do the stretching, but the stretching wasn't helping. And I was getting this pain down, and suddenly my calf went into spasm. And it was like as if there was a knot in my calf, and it wouldn't go away. And I went down for the rest of the week. I was getting treatment. And on the day, I had to go out to get a fitness test. We were down in Seamill, and I went out with Brian Scott round probably about 10 o'clock. and out into the garden. We used to train
on the day of the cup final.
The day of the cup final, and we were training. We went out to do it, and we trained on the back of the gardens. Anybody's been down in Seamill? It's a wonderful place. We loved it down there. We used to go for a walk along the beach, but we trained on the garden. There was 2 parts of it. Wonderful games, by the way. Wonderful games. We used to play
control had to be
good,
didn't
my word. And then the losers would go into the sea afterwards, the cold sea. But that's what. So we went into the fitness test. And I just couldn't move. I hadn't the movement. I couldn't get up on my toes and move. And eventually I had to say to Scotty, who was a physio at the time, he says, this isn't going to work. This is too much at stake here. This is the cup final. This is a Centenary year. I'd be letting people down. And my own man says, if I can't play, and if I go out thinking I'll be all right, and then suddenly the whole thing, and we're playing against a good Dundee United team. So
how do you feel in that moment?
Well, to be honest, I sat in the wall for 10-15 minutes on my own afterwards, then I'd be beside the sea, and there would be a few kind of tears. I'm an emotional man at times, and missing out the day. If I'd made the decision probably early in the week, I would have had time to come to terms with it, but that wasn't the case. So the decision was made that morning, almost 4 hours before the game started, and then they had to go and tell him Al midnight, of course. And I've never asked Alan how he felt about that in many ways. How did he feel about being told so late in the day? I'm sure he had his kind of mind made up a little bit and prepared, because he knew that I was injured and he was training all week with the team anyway. But he came in and did a good job and got his medal. And it wasn't about the medal, to be honest. I think if I got a medal, I would be feeling a bit, I'm getting something for maybe nothing here, even though I'd played all the rounds leading up to that. So, no, I'm not.
Did you ever worry at the time that your injury, nothing you could do about it, could cost Celtic the double?
If I went out and played?
Or just the fact that you weren't playing, the fact that you pulled out, and a relatively inexperienced goalkeeper?
No, I don't think so. I think Alan was always going to come in earlier in the season, played against Rangers and that's what you have to have a second choice for. No, I think if I played and wasn't fit, I think definitely then I might have hindered the guys and not been able to get that result, which was a huge result for us on a Centenary. And it was a wonderful season. It was probably my best season of all, even though when you consider that we had so many good players and the way we played the game and all that, but we won lots of games that year very much on the defensive tactics, closing down, pressing teams, really structured. Mick McCarthy, Derek White, Roy Aiken, in front of me, Anton and Chris. We had Granty in the middle of the pitch, who was more the defensive side, but the way we pressed the game that year, and personally for me, that was the best season that I ever felt. And then it culminated in me going into the European Championship with Ireland, of course, after that cup final. And then I had the disc operation right after the European Championship, and I was out for about 3 months. It's
a good time to touch on your international career then, because to a lot of Celtic fans you're known as much for being the Ireland goalkeeper as the Celtic goalkeeper, so some very notable games. But let's, before that, talk about the man who was at the helm at the time. Nowadays we get a lot of managers who are coaches. They're coaches. They perhaps didn't play the game, but they're very, very good man managers. They're very different styles. Jack Charlton was very much a manager.
Yeah.
How much was he an influence in your career back then?
Huge. Listen, you get a guy coming in with a reputation because he had won the World Cup, coming in to manage your team, and you're wondering, what's this guy going to be like? And I think the first time he walked in, he just almost united with me in many ways, because he was an ordinary guy.
So I think, am I right in saying Bob Paisley was in for the job?
Bob was in at that time. They were having this big debate. I think they went for lunch halfway through. Bob had the job before lunch, and Jack had the job after lunch.
What did they have for lunch?
Very much a typical Irish way of picking things. I think there was a few on it wanted Bob Paisley, and there was another few that wanted Jack. And by the time they had come back, they had influenced the ones who wanted. And when I look back on it, Jack played a certain style of football. Listen, and there would be a lot of people around Dublin, especially, and the people who were the pundits at that time, Damon Dumfries and Johnny Giles. Even though he knew John because he played with him with the Leeds team, and they got on very well. I think Johnny Giles used to babysit for Jack in many days. But the style of play kind of upset a few people in that way, Liam Brady and that, because the style at that time was to go back and get a ball off the centre halves and Liam or John, if he was playing in a team, and then try to build a game. But at that time we didn't have the players who could do it, and they end up losing silly goals. So Jack came in and he says, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to put the ball at risk. And he was clever, because if you put the ball at risk in international football and lose that first goal, there's a great chance that you're not going to get a goal back, or so on and so forth. So he took the risk out of it, but he was very clever in the way that he wanted us to play up front. You know, he asked Liam Brady to play off the front players rather than come back getting the ball. Liam took a while to adjust that. Then unfortunately he got injured. But Jack was lucky then too, because he got Ray Houghton out of a night that he went to see John Aldridge at Oxford. And Ray was there also, and John had mentioned that Ray's parents came from Donegal. His dad came from Donegal, born in Castlemark, of course. And on that night he got Ray Houghton, who was a wonderful player. So he got, and he had the nucleus of the team then, and he just kept adding one or two to it. But
Mark Lawrenson, of course, that well-known Irishman.
Well, Mark Lawrenson was a wonderful player for Liverpool. You know, I go back to that time when I got into the team, and I look at a team that beat Scotland. We didn't win that many games away from home before Jack. Then suddenly we started winning games, and we won games against Scotland here, for example, in the European Championships. And that night I was in goals. Celtic, of course, playing in Europe for a few years. Paul McGrath was right back. Manchester United, Kevin Moore in Manchester United. Mick McCarthy was in Man City and came up to us. Ronnie Whelan played left back, Liverpool. You had Ray Houghton, Liverpool. You had Mark Lawrenson in the middle of the pitch, who scored, Liverpool. Liam Brady, who had just left Juventus. You had on the left wing Tony Galvin from Spurs. And you had John Aldridge, Liverpool, and Frank Staple in Manchester United up front.
That's some lineup.
And that didn't include Chris Hughton, who was with Spurs, and Dave O'Leary, who was with Arsenal, and so on and so forth. So it was an incredible group of players. But what he did, which was quite incredible, he gave us responsibility. And he gave us a situation where he made us accountable in the team. And you know, he said to me, listen, you're in charge of everything defensively. We didn't have a goalkeeper coach. Jerry Payton was back up to me. Jerry was experienced, older than me, and he was a wonderful help to me and a wonderful guy. But I had to then take on that responsibility at 26, 27 years old. Nobody had ever said that to me before. And I had to do all the defensive stuff, talk to Jerry, talk to Mick McCarthy, Kevin, and then go and tell the likes of Liam Brady and Mark Lawrence where they should be in the wall and where they... And I just grew and grew and grew within the team, and I became one of the key players. And I think that's why I think it helped me then back at club level, to be honest, when I came into it now as a senior player. And the international football, it's a wonderful time, and it corresponded, of course, with us qualifying. We needed Gary Mackay to score that goal, laid on by Roy Aitken, by the way, his pass laid him on, and then we qualified, and then it just took off, and we had 10 years of brilliant relief through '88, beating England in that first game, Ray Houghton scoring, me playing well in the game, and then into the 1990 and the penalty save, and our country just went crazy. And anybody, I'm sure some of the fans here, and a lot of the Irish people living in Glasgow too, which was unique for them. I know lots of them had a few whiskies and broke a few tables and so on, celebrating in the house. And it is a wonderful, wonderful thing to see a country united through international football. That's why international football is so important. Look at what happened in Iceland in the last couple of years also.
Well, before we finish, I can't not talk about that save in Italia 90 in Genoa in the Luigi Ferraris Stadium, I think it was. Two things I wanted to ask you about that. How did you prepare for that penalty shootout against Romania, and how much did that save change your life?
Well, you know, we lost the cup final here against Aberdeen, and I went the right way for one penalty, Jim Bent's penalty, and everyone else I didn't go the right way, and that stuck in my head. And I remember going away and talking to Jerry Payton about it, and Jerry became the goalkeeper coach with Arsenal. He's now out in Japan working, so he was almost thinking that way himself anyway, and he had watched me in that cup final, and we sat down and talked about it, and we came up with a plan. We didn't have video analysis at that time, so we didn't know the Romanians, for example. You didn't know them, but you kind of had to work something else out. And it was almost out in the way that they approached the ball, and in the way that they ran, the angle that they ran to the ball. And Jerry said, well, if they go to an acute angle, they're going to put it back to where they're standing, if you know what I mean. So if you think about the Timofti penalty, Daniel Timofti, penalty, and I have a wee story around that I'll tell you right now. But Daniel Timofty penalty that I saved, he stood at almost an acute angle to the ball, so he was always going to put it to my right, in the same side that he was standing on. Absolutely,
yeah.
Trying to disguise us, and it was a nice height. And I went the right way for every single penalty on that occasion, which was quite incredible. I nearly got to one or two, just working out how to get up to the ball and how they ran to the ball and so on and so forth. Which was, if I had that probably bit of knowledge going into the Scottish Cup final, then history might have changed. And then, of course, making the save was wonderful. Dave O'Leary, who had never had a penalty before, stepping up to had a penalty. He'd been practicing with Niall Quinn because
what a penalty it was.
It was a brilliant penalty. And the other man had never had a penalty before in his life until that occasion was Ray Houghton. I didn't know that till 2 years ago. Ray Houghton coming up and hitting his first ever penalty in a shootout in the quarter, or to get us to the quarter final of a World Cup.
Why would Jack Charlton let them take penalties if neither of them had taken
Well,
one?
nobody had organised anything. Nobody had really organised anything. I was talking to Noel King, who was then the technical director of the FAI, or head of coach education. He was on the trip with us, and it was him. He was telling me that it was him that was writing down the names for Jack. And Jack kind of left it open because he didn't know who was going to be substituted. He didn't know who was going to be in the right frame of mind. If it came down to that. The one that was really focused was Kevin Sheedy, who had a wonderful left foot, and he was the only one that I knew that was taking a penalty, because I said to him, I says, Kevin, are you taking a penalty? And he says, yes. He was sitting down the ground. I went over to him and he says, yeah, I'm going to take the first penalty and I'm going to head it straight down the middle. And 10 minutes or whatever it is later, straight down the middle. So there was focus and professionalism. The rest I didn't know. I didn't have a clue that Dave was taking a penalty. Didn't know that Cass was taking a penalty. Tony Cascarino hit the ground, by the way, in a divot and passed the goalkeeper before the ball, which happens. Andy and Ray was the other two. So I didn't have a clue. I was focused kind of in on my own situation, really focused on getting my. I used to have this little thing too in penalties where I would try to go one. I would go one way to go the other way, kind of almost exaggerate to the guy taking it.
Because you couldn't move along the line back then, could you?
No, you weren't supposed to move. But I had this little movement that I used to go left and right. And ask Billy Stark and those guys who say penalties against the league here, and they'll maybe tell you too that foxed them out a few times. But listen, it changed my life, that penalty, and at that point, it changed people's perception. Especially in Ireland, we're still living off it today.
Yeah.
I was over there on many occasions in the last year, and I was over there last week talking to a group of business people, and they were reminiscing about that moment, and they all remember it. And when you stick emotion, it's like the European Cup final. It's like those people who lived that, they'll never forget that for the rest of their lives. Because when you put emotion into things, and that emotion captures you, you'll remember. You can remember the detail also around that emotion.
And you strike me as the kind of person who would be very conscious and very aware at that moment of just what that meant, not just for the team, but for your country as well.
Yeah, I think it was afterwards too. We came back when we flew into Dublin. I'll never forget flying into Dublin. We all had a few drinks and so on and so forth. But we were suddenly, we're flying over Dublin. The pilot took us kind of off the normal path and took us round Dublin, and he kind of put the plane at an angle so we could see the crowds. It was mobbed. Dublin was mobbed. There must have been 500,000 people from the airport, and we landed in that. And we had a little taste of it in '88, but this was special. And then I came back here, and then went to Donegal. I flew into Donegal, into Carrickfinn Airport, and there was thousands there. And it was a lovely, lovely moment. Went round to Keju, up to Dunlow, around the usual. The bands were out, everything was out, and it was wonderful. And I see some of the footage now of young people. They were only kids. Now they're grown adults, and they'll still talk about it.
You talk about young people. You're still involved in the game. You are, of course, involved in the media side of things as well. But through UEFA, you're still involved in goalkeeping. How important is it for you, having had the experiences that you've had, to be able to pass on what you've learned to the next generation of coaches and footballers? Well,
it's always been my passion, because when we didn't have goalkeeper coaches when I was in the game. I had Joe Corrigan came up here under Liam in my latter days. And he was my first really goalkeeper coach, apart from the Frank Connors and those people. I remember Ronnie Simpson came in for a couple of days, and that was it. the great Ronnie Simpson. But we didn't really have out-and-out goalkeeper coaches, qualified goalkeeper coaches. So it's always been my passion. When I was working, then I was grateful to Mick and to Tommy to bring me back into that role. Back at Celtic, I was still playing, but I was goalkeeper coach, so I had the responsibility of Shea Given when he came here, and Stuart Kerr, and Gordon Marshall. So I kind of took on that role, and then with the Irish team, Shea was already in the Irish team at that point in time, Alan Kelly. So I took on those roles. I was lucky that I got my qualifications in Scotland, outfield qualifications, and then I set up the goalkeeping education programme over in Ireland, and that was me into that process. And I was always kind of really, really into it, and I loved it. I went on a tutor course down in Limerick in 2002, and it was the best course I've ever been on. It was about life lessons. It was about life skills. It was much more than coaching, how to deal with people. And when you think about it, if you're a goalkeeper coach or a goalkeeper you're almost demanding of people. You're telling people what to do. You're organising and that. And as a tutor, you have to step back from that, and you've got to drag it from them. You've got to ask questions. And that course can almost give me the skills and the confidence that I could do that. And it was wonderful, and I take that on. And I'm very lucky. I was the technical director in Ireland for 8 years, and from that I sat on a panel in the UEFA. And then when I was leaving the FAI in 2010, they asked me to stay on and to roll out their first ever goalkeeping education diploma. So I had to build the guidelines and work with a group and set the group up, and I'm still doing it 8 years later. And now we're into new areas, and I'm doing a lot of generic stuff. I was just back from Madrid yesterday, actually, and I spoke about goalkeeping coaching and the role of the goalkeeper coach in the modern game, and how the game has changed and what they have to do. But there were 600 people at it from all levels, and the great coaches were there. And here's Packie from Donegal as a young boy, now up there talking to these guys, and they were wonderful, talking to many of them afterwards. Pochettino, Louis Enrique, all the goalkeeper coach, all their staff. It's amazing in England the amount of Spanish coaches, managers now that are in England, and it was a wonderful occasion for me, so I could go and talk to them about this whole evolution of goalkeepers. So my role now is helping the coaches, goalkeeper coaches, and in turn they're helping the goalkeepers that's coming through. And it's a tough life for a goalkeeper now. They have to be a wonderful shot stopper. They have to not make a mistake. They have to pass the ball. They have to have a range of passing. They have to have composure. They need to see the game. Look at what Brendan's doing here with Celtic, and what the role of Craig Gordon in that team. He has got to have all the skills and the mentality to fit in the way he's thinking. So it's not easy, and the goalkeeper coaches has to adapt to it also. So I'm very happy out that I'm getting to that age that I can help everybody.
Great, you remain humble to your roots, but you've still got so much to offer. It's great to see you still so involved in the game, and a pleasure to speak to you, Celtic icon, Packie Bonner.
Thank you, Jerry.